It's really good to see a whole lot of people come along to these seminars. I've been in the property business for 35 years, and for the first 20 of those 35 years, I had no idea what management rights even were. Management rights are two words that a lot of people in Queensland particularly have heard, but it's a very nebulous thing. Most of them not really sure what that is, you know. And one of the things that I learnt many years ago was that if you're a person who's not as smart as the people in this room and you haven't taken the trouble to come along to a seminar like this, your first experience of management rights is having it mentioned to you by a friend, and you think, oh, management rights, I'd like to find out more about that. So you go to the Courier Mail on Saturday, and I must confess there's not as many ads in the Courier Mail as there used to be 15 years ago, but there's still some. So you look at an ad in the Courier Mail and it says management rights, Roachdale, blah, 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 phone number. So you pick up the phone and you ring the number. Now, your introduction to management rights is going to depend very, very much on the knowledge of whoever else is on the other end of that phone. Because, unfortunately, there are people out there trying to sell management rights who aren't actually specialists in the management rights business. And if there's one piece of advice I'm going to give you to take away from today, that if you ignore will cost you money, and that is deal with specialists in this business. If you're dealing with a broker, deal with a broker who specialises in management rights, has been in the business for years, they know what they're talking about. You deal with lawyers who specialise in management rights. You may have an old family lawyer that's been handling your family's conveyancing for the last 50 years. He's a lovely old bloke. Runs from a little office under his house out at Everton Park, and he's a really nice fella. So you buy management rights and you say, oh, I better give old Fred at Everton Park the job to look into my management rights. Now, professionals being what professionals are, nobody likes to admit when you're a professional that you don't know anything about the subject. So dear old Fred, being the family retainer that he is, he'll take on the job. Guess what? You've just put a noose around your neck, because dear old Fred might be the best conveyancing clerk in Brisbane, but being a lawyer in the management rights industry is such a specialised job that old Fred's going to cost you a lot of money. The same goes for accountants, and the same even goes for bankers. I could tell you some horror stories about banks, because every bank has its own in-house specialist in management rights. Now again, you might have been dealing with the one branch manager for yonks, so you think, oh, I better go and talk to my branch manager about borrowing this money. The branch manager knows diddly squat about management rights, but he's not going to tell you that, because bankers get brownie points for lending money. So he's going to try and take you under his wing, and he's going to muddle his way through, and he's probably going to cost you a lot of money. I had an experience about 13 years ago where a very, very big client of a bank who shall remain nameless, but were very big players in the industry at the time. These people were a family with millions of dollars worth of assets. They went to borrow $2 million to buy very substantial management rights, and the business banker who had dealt with them for years didn't pass it on to a management rights specialist in the bank. Settlement ended up being delayed for over 6 weeks. It was a total stuff-up from start to finish, and in the end, that couple took all their family company business away from the bank because the banker didn't have the common sense to realise he was out of his depth. So whatever you do, stick to people who know what they're talking about. Industry experts. One of the things when you meet an agent is that you've got to have a feeling of trust and rapport with that agent. If you're not comfortable with the person you're talking to, whether it be a lady or a gentleman, then go away and find someone you are comfortable with. Because the broker who's going to try and find you the right management rights has to ask you some questions that may appear to be fairly private information. Now, if you're not willing to share the information with your broker, then boy, this is going to be a very tiring and tedious process, let me tell you. Because one thing you've got to remember with management rights is that we don't and can't sell you a management rights. I mean, if I'm a good enough salesman, I can probably sell you a set of steak knives. But I can't sell you a $2 million management rights if you don't want to buy it. So forget about all this foot in the door selling stuff. It doesn't exist in management rights. If you're dealing with a broker who is a foot in the door, high pressure person, get the hell out of there, because he's not got your best interests at heart. You see that for every person in this room, if you decide to go ahead and buy management rights, there is going to be the right complex out there for you somewhere. So we have to know, if we're going to do the matchmaking, these are the questions we need to know. What's your budget? Do you want to buy in a specific area? Are you interested in a permanent one, or are you interested in a holiday one? What size manager's unit do I need? What income am I after? Well, obviously what income you're after is tied a little bit to what's your budget. Because if you're after an income of $250,000 a year and you only have a budget of $600,000, you're in deep trouble. Gardening, I love this one. You see, you can buy management rights in the city to the sort of high rises and they have 2 potted palms at the front door. Now that's my kind of complex. I am known in the industry as a botanical illiterate. I do not know the difference between flowers and weeds. So for me to go out and buy a big townhouse complex in the suburbs with 2 acres of gardens and all these sorts of things, that would kill me. Absolutely kill me. I couldn't do it. And yet other people in this room might have a real green thumb. And nothing makes them happier than to get out weeding and trimming and plucking and all those gardens, a whole lot. Not me. But think about that, because if you are a person who is allergic to Roundup, you don't go out into the suburbs and buy yourself a great big place full of gardens. Established or brand spanking new. Look, I'll say a couple of words about this. I might add that when I used to do this talk, usually I had Rusty at the back of the room after about the first hour with one of those shepherd's crooks, hauling me off from the lectern, because this is a session that could last an hour and a half. But today it's not going to, because in your notes I have actually given you the entire script, if you like. I mean, it won't be what I said, but it'll give you the gist. I will fill in all these bits and pieces for you in those notes. So I'm not going to actually comment on everything on the screen, because otherwise I'll be getting hauled off the lectern again. There's Damien mentioned about whether you buy something established or brand spanking new. One of the things I've always loved about management rights is that if you're a beginner and you've never been in the property business and you never had a real estate licence and you don't really know much about it at all, except maybe once you owned a house, you can buy a management rights that's established, and for the first 3 months, the first 6 months, all you got to do is keep doing what the other bloke was doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, after you've been there for 6 months and you got your feet under the desk and you know what you're doing, sure, if you can see ways of doing it better, then you change a few things and you do it better. But management rights, particularly permanent management rights, are one of the simplest businesses to buy and move into and pick up the threads. Sure, the first 3 months will still be a bit chronic, always are, but then you'll be fine. I basically have a rule now that I won't sell off the plan to anyone who is not experienced. The exception to that could be someone who has really vast commercial experience, vast public relations experience. There are people who can do anything, as you know. But the general average run of people find off the plan very disconcerting. Because if you buy an established place, the computers are all there, the programs are all there, the trust account's there, the method of doing everything's all there. You just sit yourself down behind the desk and away you go. When you buy off the plan, 9 times out of 10 you've got to buy the computers, you've got to buy the programs to put on them. You've got 40 townhouses that are all empty with no tenants and you've got to fill them. You've got the patio roof that leaks and you've got to deal with the builder who is very reluctant always to come back and fix things. I sold it off the plan to some very good friends of my wife. Bad mistake. The wife in the partnership had run her own physiotherapy practice for 20 years and then had run a big news agency for 8 years. Her husband was a civil engineer who'd worked on big civil engineering things and then with his wife ran the news agency for 8 years. So I thought, boy, these two should be able to handle a 38 townhouse off the plan. Oh boy. Not only did I nearly cause divorce, they both ended up with a nervous breakdown. I'd still think that 8 years later they're getting over the experience. Now, these were not idiot beginners. I mean, one's an engineer, one's a physio. These are commercially aware people, but they just did not understand the problems that can fall in your lap when you're trying to set up a brand new business. So my advice is, unless you are very, very, very experienced at commercial things and dealing with people, look at established ones before you look at off the plan. I'm going to say a couple of words about permanent and holiday. During the global financial crisis, permanent management rights remained one of the most foolproof businesses in Australia. The management rights business continued on as if the global financial crisis didn't exist. In fact, we had more buyers coming out at times during the GFC than we had before it, because so many middle management type people lost their jobs and they thought to themselves, damn it, I've been with the bank for 35 years and now I've just been sacked. I'm not going back into a corporate environment again to climb the greasy pole because I'll just get near the top again and they'll kick me down. So those people thought, I will go out and I will look for something where I can be my own boss. And a permanent management rights is one of the businesses in this country where you can be your own boss within limits. And as long as you do your job properly, it's almost impossible to lose your money. The only people I've ever seen lose money in management rights are people who don't quite understand the law and they take the trust account money down to the bloody pokies on Saturday afternoon and put it through. Now, that will not only cause you to lose your money, it will cause you to lose your freedom. So, we're talking about permanent and holiday. Now, as required, look, permanent management rights, you can... we used to tell people years ago, yeah, you can go and play golf, you know. But we're a bit more realistic these days. Yes, you can go and play golf, and a lot of managers play golf at least once a week. And a few of the better organised ones play golf twice a week. Now I'm talking about permanent management rights. Holiday management rights are a bit more 24/7. See, the difference between a permanent and a holiday management rights is often the occupancy rate. If you own a 40 townhouse complex up the road here at Runcorn, your tenants come in and they stay on 6 or 12 or 18 month leases, or even these days 2-year leases. Now, once all your 40 townhouses are all chock-a-block full up, well, you've got nothing more to rent. You've already mowed the lawn, you've trimmed the hedge, and you've tested the pool. So what are you going to do? Sit in your office all day? Well, of course you're not. Go and have a game of golf. In a holiday management rights, there's only about 2 or 3 weeks of every year where you're 100% full, maybe 2 weeks over Christmas and maybe Easter. For the rest of the time, there are vacant units in your building. Now, you have a duty to your owners to try to maximise their income. You do not maximise their income in a holiday unit by closing the office and go to play golf, because someone can walk up your path, just arrived in town looking for a week's accommodation. Oh, they're closed. So what do? Up the building next door at Surfers Paradise, and somebody else's landlord just picked up a week's rent because you were out at Surfers Paradise Golf Club. So you've got to remember that holiday units are a much more full-time job. The other thing that tricks people is that, yes, you can earn more money in a holiday complex because there are more sources of income. And people say to me, oh, you must earn more money because the commission rate's 12% instead of 7.5 or 8. I say, yeah, that's right, but don't forget that in a permanent complex, let's say in the southern suburbs of Brisbane, you operate on almost 100% occupancy year round. So you are picking up your 7.5 or 8% rent, commission on rent that's coming in every day, every week, every month for the whole year. You might be getting 12% on the rent on the holiday unit at Surfers Paradise, but you've only got 65% occupancy. So 35% of the year there's no rent coming in at all. So consequently there's no commission coming in at all. So don't be fooled by the rent thing. You've got to also combine that with the occupancy. There are, of course, many holiday complexes that have occupancy rates far higher than 65%. You need more skills, you need people skills. I always say, people say to me, what skills do you need? What are you going to be a good management rights owner? And I say, you only need one thing. You need to be a people person. Because if you're not a people person, you're in the wrong job. Because when you're an on-site manager, it ain't all mowing the lawn. You spend most of every day interacting to one extent or another with people. Now, if you go and buy a holiday complex at Broadbeach and you're the grumpiest old cuss in the world who absolutely hates dealing with people and kids in particular, then believe you me, this is not going to be a happy experience for you or your guests, because they aren't going to come back. You've got to be able to... You see, when in a holiday complex, people are only there for a short time, but they're there for a good time. They don't want to see a grumpy old puss like you every time they walk down through the bloody lobby. Lifestyle, we talked about that. There's less paperwork in a holiday complex because the holiday complexes are not subject to the Residential Tenancies Act. So you don't have to worry about Form 9s and 10s and all those things. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through a couple of these. When the internet first started, how shall I say, having an impact on the management rights industry, I used to hate going to the internet and looking up management rights listings because they were pathetic. It was like going to the Courier Mail and reading a classified ad. The agents didn't tell you anything. Nothing. Now, when we first built the RAAS website in 2003, we made a decision that we weren't going to treat the purchasers like idiots. So on our website, you will find, if you look at any listing that's there, you will find a lot of the critical information that will allow you to think, yeah, I'd like to find out more about this one, or no, this one wouldn't suit me, I'll look at another. Now, these are the sorts of things you'll find on our website. Age of complex, you might say, what's that got to do with it? Well, here's one thing that's got to do with it. If you're a home handyman type person, and again, I'm not. My home handyman skills are the same ones I have with gardening. Okay? When I owned a management rights, I don't think I used to put any income in for repairs and maintenance at all, because I had to pay someone else to do it all because I couldn't even change a tap washer. But the age of a complex is important if you're one of those people who has trade skills or you're just a genuine handyman, because if you buy a complex that's 1 year old, then there's not really going to be much outlet for your skills, because quite frankly the builder's still responsible for the things that go wrong, and you're not going to earn any income doing little repairs for people. But if you're a home handyman and you buy something that's 7 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, you can probably count on picking up a nice little stream of income on the side, which will be included in your net profit by doing all those little jobs, because those little jobs are not included in your body corporate salary. The little jobs you do for your owners, that's additional income. It's nothing to do with the body corporate. So that is why that's important. Total units, I'm going to run through this pretty quickly or I'll run out of time, but the total units in the complex are important, because one of the things we tell you is what the body corporate salary is. Okay? So let's say the body corporate salary is $100,000 a year plus GST. And then you look and you see that there's 100 units in the complex. So you are being paid $1,000 per unit per year by the body corporate. Okay? Now, most people in the industry will tell you that that is within the normal parameters. But let's say you look and you see the body corporate salary is only $50,000 a year, but then you look and see the total number of units is 100, you say, holy hell, that salary is only $500 per unit per year. Now that is way outside what the accepted parameters are. And one of the questions you can then ask the agent is, oh, do you know if they've ever applied for a salary adjustment? Because you see, if you can buy something that has a salary component of $500 per lot per year, and then after you buy it, you do a really good job for a year, and then you apply to the body corporate to have your salary increase to more like market value, $1,000 or $1,100 per year, guess what you've done? You've lifted your net profit by $50,000 a year, and if you apply a multiplier of 4, you've just lifted your capital value by $200,000. So that's why these things are all important. Number of units in and out of a letting pool. Sometimes you'll see a complex and there's a total of 100 units in the complex, and you look and you see there's only 40 in the rental pool. So there's 60 not in the rental pool. You sort of say, oh, I wonder why that is. Now there's a question you'd ask your agent. What's going on here? That's not very many. And then you look at, we also tell you what the breakup of the ones outside the rental pool are. Are they lock-ups? Now in the Gold Coast, for example, or the Sunshine Coast, you find that wealthy millionaires from Melbourne might own the unit, and they only come up for 3 months at winter, and they lock the unit up for the rest of the year. So the unit sits there for 9 months of the year, not in the rental pool, not being occupied. It's what you call a lock-up. But then again, you might find that there's 30 in the rental pool being managed by outside agents, and you think, whew, that's a lot. And to some very good operators, that's a bit of blue sky, because you say to yourself, you only pay for what you get. Now, if there's 30 units outside the rental pool, you can say to yourself, gee, I wonder what the history of that is. And but you're not paying for those 30. You're not paying for any income from those 30. But if you buy that and do the right thing, there is a possibility that you can pull some of those back into the rental pool, because on-site management is always more effective than off-site management. I can tell you that because I've been on both sides. I've owned rent rolls in a traditional real estate agency, and I've been an on-site manager, and I've seen hundreds of on-site managers, and on-site management is always more efficient than off-site management. So that's just sort of thing to look at. Type of units, I won't go into that. Tariffs, you need to look at a holiday unit and say, what are they charging at the moment? then go online and have a look at what the opposition's charging. Maybe this particular complex is being under-rented. Manager's unit size, that's obviously something you need to know. If you've got 2 teenage boys, there's not much good buying a manager's unit that's got 1 bedroom. So you need to look at that. Standard accommodation module. Years and years ago, this wasn't quite as important as it is today. But the banks now do definitely look on the length of the agreement that remains as being an important component as to the value of the business and also to your lending or borrowing capacity. Generally speaking, even if you've got 20 years left on the agreement, I don't know whether I'm still correct in saying this, but usually the banks on the business loan will usually limit you to about 15 years anyway. But if you've only got 9 years left, you're being limited to 9 years. So if you're trying to pay off your business loan in 9 years, it really does lift very substantially the amount of spare money you've got to have every month to get back in the game. Term of the agreement, years to run. Well, I've just covered that. Office hours. Look, in holiday complexes, almost invariably there will be some office hours laid down in the agreement. Now, don't forget that when you buy management rights, you are buying a caretaking agreement, and that caretaking agreement is the contract you have with the body corporate. Now, if that caretaking agreement in a permanent complex says that the office has to be open from 8 till 5, which I must say very few do, then that's what it says. And while the previous manager and the previous manager and the previous manager may never have had the office open from 8 till 5, if you have a big falling out with your body corporate over something, believe you me, they can make you open the office from 8 to 5 because that's what your contract says. So look for office hours and just see what the agreements say. Discuss it with your lawyer because he will advise you exactly what's in that agreement. The other point about agreements is, of course, that the body corporate can't force you to do things that aren't in the caretaking agreement. Unfortunately, some bodies corporate think that you're their servant. And whatever they say, you've got to jump, salute and go on. That is not the case. You are a contractor and the terms of your contract are there in black and white. Body corporate salary, I mentioned that. At the moment you will find the range that we traditionally see probably is... If I was a developer and I was building a new lot of townhouses at the moment, I would probably be putting in a body corporate salary of around $1,200 per lot per annum plus GST. Okay? In the complex that I used to own, you're not going to believe this, I was being paid at the time I sold it $1,450 per lot per year in a complex that had no swimming pool, no tennis court, no barbecue, no nothing. Because this particular complex, when it changed to accommodation module back in about 98, had a clause in there that said the body corporate salary went up by CPI or 5%, whichever is the greater. So from 1998 to 2000 and whatever, when I sold it, 2005, this body corporate salary had been compounding at the rate of 105% and it got up to $1,450. Now when I sold it, I went to the body corporate and I said, look, this is getting out of control. Why don't we do a deal? You give me a new 25-year agreement at CPI only and we'll get rid of the 5%. So it was a win-win. The body corporate had a win. I had a win because they couldn't reduce my $1,450. I was still getting overpaid. But it meant that when I sold it, the incoming manager did not have a noose around her neck, because that 5% would have become a noose. Because it would have got to the stage after a little while where all the owners, particularly investors, they would have said, this is ridiculous. I'm not making any money. I'm making the on-site manager as rich as Croesus, but there's nothing left for me. So as it turned out, these are the sort of things that you've got to keep your eye on and speak to a good solicitor about. Salary review date, all of these things usually go up annually, and as I say, normally it will be CPI, or it could be CPI or 3%, or still out there, in some rare cases, CPI or 5%, but there aren't many 5% left. Net profit. You will note in my notes that I give you the definition of net profit. Net profit, I've got 5 minutes, Russ. Net profit is different to taxable profit. Net profit has a very definitive definition. I think that's alliteration. It has a special meaning in our industry, and it's a very simple meaning. Basically, you put all your allowable sources of income down on your left-hand side, and you put the actual expenses incurred in the running of the business down the right-hand side, particularly leaving out depreciation, a salary for the on-site manager, and interest on borrowings. Okay? Now that's the big difference between in the taxation return that your accountant would prepare for Canberra. They will include deductions for depreciation. They will include all sorts of funny things that are not included in the net profit calculation for management rights. Probably our great accountant will do a little more on that. The management rights business price, we touched on this briefly. The way you arrive at a management rights business price is, first of all, you start with the net profit. And then we apply what's called a multiplier. The basic rule is that the bigger the business and the bigger the net profit, then the bigger the multiplier. If you had a business that had a $400,000 net profit, you might pay in excess of 5 times that for the business. But if you were looking at a business that only had a net profit of $50,000, little home-based business, mum and dad works, mum runs it, 50 grand a year, you might only have a multiplier of 3 times. It is a movable feast. We have seen multipliers during the global financial crisis barely move very much up or down. And then in the last 12 months, we have started to see them edging up again. We are getting higher multipliers, particularly for big juicy complexes. We're getting higher multipliers now than we were 2 years ago. Manager's unit price, look, this again is something that changes. Basically your manager's unit is just a piece of real estate. But because it's a special piece of real estate, it's the only piece of real estate in that complex from which the business can be conducted. It has been traditional in the past to add a little bit of a surcharge to it. Now that surcharge has varied in the last 15 years between 0 and 20%. At the moment, it's probably somewhere between 0 and 10%. Okay? It depends. I mean, obviously, if it's a very nice townhouse and it has a big separate, big office alongside, then you're going to get a premium. You're going to pay a premium for that. But essentially, if it's absolutely pea in a pod with another unit in the complex, then it will either be valued the same or it will be valued marginally higher, but it's no longer 20% or anything like that. Okay? During the global financial crisis, that was one thing that did change, because there were very few banks and very few valuers during the GFC who put a premium on managers' units. But we are starting to see a little bit of that come back in again. Okay, you've got one. First of all, we, generally speaking in management rights, because the contracts run to this thick. We do not do necessarily what we would do to sell just an ordinary old home unit, where you might actually draw up a residential contract. Generally speaking, in management rights, we negotiate the terms on what's called an offer and acceptance document, which is pretty much 1 or 2 A4 pages, but that will set out the price you're offering for the unit, the price you're offering for the business. It'll put what the net profit is and just the basic bones of what the agreement is going to be. Now, once you've arrived at a negotiated point where the buyer and the seller are both happy, we then go to the contract document itself. There's two contracts. There's a contract for the unit and a contract for the business. The ones that are used in our industry are traditionally the Real Estate Institute of Queensland's basic contract, and then we have a set of special conditions that have been agreed by all the practicing solicitors who are the major management rights solicitors. So generally speaking, if you sign the standard type contract and went to Frank Higginson, for example, Frank will check through that contract, but unless we've changed something very strangely in there, it will be fine. The same if we sent it to any one of the other 3 or 4 specialist solicitors. They would all accept that because they all got together to draw it up. Due diligence, obviously this is really important, and it's one of the reasons that management rights is such a foolproof business. When you sign an offer and acceptance document, even when you sign the contract, there is a clause in that contract that virtually turns it for you into an option, because there's a clause in there that says that if your solicitor is not happy, or you're not happy with everything to do with his due diligence, you can rip it up and get your deposit back. So I have never in my life seen an industry where a purchaser has as much protection as they do in this industry. If you are dealing with the brokers and the lawyers who specialise, you are going to be protected all the way down the line. We have a case at the moment where a lady who's buying something's having a bit of a hissy fit and is probably going to walk away from a contract. Now, we probably all know that she has no real grounds for walking away from a contract, but because the way the contracts are written, in that first 14 to 21 days, you can almost change your damn mind and have buyer's remorse and still walk away. But that's something I can't give legal advice, so you need to talk to your lawyer. Body corporate approval, there is a provision in every contract that says you must be approved by the committee of the body corporate for whom you wish to take over the management rights. Generally speaking, there is a provision in there that says that the body corporate may not unreasonably withhold consent. Obviously, if you've just got out of Bogger Road, no, that's closed. If you've just got out of jail having fleeced somebody's trust account for $500,000, there's a fair chance you might get knocked back. But if, however, you're an ordinary everyday Joe and you don't have a criminal record as long as your arm, it's very difficult for a body corporate to knock you back. I would say to my Asian friends in the room that it is, I think, bodies corporate are starting to look very carefully at people's English language skills, because we have had people come into the industry whose English language skills really are deficient, and that might be fine if you own a management rights at Sunnybank Hills and all your tenants are also Chinese, for example, but unfortunately all your owners live in Melbourne and they're not. And if you can't communicate successfully with your owners, then you can have a problem, which is, I'm not telling anyone how to suck eggs. I mean, that just makes common sense. It would be like if I went to Shanghai and bought a management rights, I might have a problem too because I don't speak a word of Chinese. So I'm just saying that to warn you, but under normal circumstances, they cannot unreasonably withhold consent. You need an RLA licence, that's a resident letting agent's licence. There have been some changes now. You can, in fact, live off-site with a restricted letting agent's licence, but don't forget it's not that easy, because a lot of the body corporate caretaking agreements say you must live on-site. So it doesn't matter what the Office of Fair Trading say. If your caretaking agreement says you must live on-site, then you must live on-site. Okay, RAAS rights, we look after you. RAAS real estate, we look after you. Rusty will say a bit more about that. These are all places where you can get information. RTA is the Residential Tenancies Authority. ARAMA, Frank I think mentioned ARAMA. The managers' network is very valuable, because we find in this industry quite often the men go and play golf and the ladies do lunch. So you can learn a lot from your colleagues in the same area. Okay? Just be sure that the person you're listening to isn't talking through their hat. I'd probably ask someone from RAAS Rights first, because most of our people know this industry backwards and have owned management rights themselves and are more on top of the law than perhaps some managers. Because sometimes if you go and talk to one of your fellow managers, it's the blind leading the blind, because there are some managers out there who don't really know as much as they should. And of course there is a management rights chapter at the Real Estate Institute. I'm not going to go through that because I have mentioned the multiplier. I'm already over time and Rusty will be shouting at me soon, but you'll find everything that I've spoken about today in those notes. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and we will be around. Also, you notice some of our RAAS people here. Any of those people can answer your questions. I could talk for a lot longer about all the ins and outs and nuts and bolts, but I think I've given you a bit of a broad picture of how you should approach it if you get serious about looking at buying a management rights business. Thanks very much.